take your brake caliper off first. Once your caliper's out of the way, you can start removing the hub assembly with 10mm bolts. The assembly just slides out. Once the hub is off, you can start removing this housing here. Next bits here are these cone washers. They're notoriously a bit difficult to get off. So the best way I've found to do it is screw your nuts back on first, just in line with the top of the thread there. This is so you don't damage the thread when you're hammering it. So I've wound all those nuts in so they're pretty much in line with the very top of the stud. Now, I just about guarantee if you've been driving on the beach like me and you haven't done your wheel bearings in a while, these cone tapered washers, collars, whatever you want to call them, they're going to be quite tight. So the key here really is you don't want to damage any of the threads. So generally I would use a brass drift. It's a softer metal and shouldn't do really any damage to the threads. We've got the nuts on there as well, so that should definitely help out with protecting it. You just want to grab a hammer, a few taps, and you'll see them start to come loose. You can see I can pull that one out there, and if I take that nut off, you'll see that cone just comes straight off there. So, bit of a bastard to get off these things. If you do find they are a little bit tight to come off, you can just grab some pliers and just give it a bit of a wiggle and they'll come off nice and easy. If they're not coming off with the pliers, you need to put the nut back on and keep hitting it with the brass drift there. You haven't loosened enough. So once you've got all them loose, there's a snap ring on the very tip of the CV here, or the drive shaft. We need to remove that and then we can pull the next section off. So using some Circlip pliers or snap ring pliers, you just want to stick them in there, extend the snap ring out, you can just pull it straight off. Once that snap ring's off, this little housing here should just come straight off. So this next section, you've got like a little washer here, that's a locking washer with some kind of high sections on it. You just want to tap that up and out like that. Now what that washer is designed to do is to stop this first nut here from turning. So now that that's been knocked back, I can grab my socket and it should literally just come off by hand. It shouldn't be very tight. Lay that down. You can pull the washer out as well. Now, be careful with that washer because we are going to reuse it.
and now we can take the other nut off. Once again, it should be fairly loose. This nut here is what actually adjusts the preload of your bearing. We'll have a little bit of a look more at that once we're going back together, but very important to set that correctly, that nut there. So, take that off there. As you can see, it's quite a greasy, messy job once you get to this point. You want to have a lot of rags for this.
So after we've removed that last washer, our whole hub assembly should come out basically with the wheel bearings in it. You want to be careful, hold it, keep it all together. You can kind of just stand it upright on the floor, and there you go, we're exactly where we need to be. We've got both the wheel bearings in the hub assembly, which I'm going to take over to the bench shortly, and we can inspect this kind of area, make sure there's no damage, make sure there hasn't been any water getting in, make sure no diff oil has been coming out through the inner axle seal. So a couple of key points you want to just have a quick check over of while you're here, while you've got all this off. But let's get this up onto the bench and we'll take a look at these bearings. So once you're up on the bench, you've got your hub assembly ready to work. You don't really want to be doing this on the floor, it's a little bit challenging. So we can start working on removing the bearings. So there's a washer on the top, we'll take that out. Top wheel bearing, or the outer wheel bearing, whatever you want to call it. There. Now to get to the rear one, you're going to have to flip the disc over. And on the back, just where the bearing sits, there's a seal that's part of the assembly. So you'll need what we call a seal puller to get that out. These are pretty cheap to buy. It's like an ice pick type looking thing. You're just wedging that seal puller underneath the seal there. Just working your way around until you get that seal out. Now if it's a pretty old seal, you haven't done it in a while, it's going to come out nice and easy, but definitely replace this seal. It is designed to be replaced as part of the job, so it will get destroyed coming out. I can just about guarantee you're never going to pull that out smoothly. So I've always used genuine Toyota ones, never had a problem with them. The seal's designed to keep the dust and the water and all that kind of crap out of the bearing assembly, so it has a very, very important job. You're going to get a lot more life out of your bearings if this is doing its job properly. So yeah, remove that seal, throw it in the bin, and then you'll be able to pull your bearing out. So once the bearings are out, give them a good clean. I usually just do it with a rag first. Look, generally speaking, if the bearings are in good condition, you're greasing them frequently, they're not getting contaminants, dirt, mud, all that kind of stuff in there. Personally, I avoid using like degreaser and kerosene and other chemicals like that. If there's any of it kind of left around, it can break down the new wheel bearing grease that you're putting in. So I just give it a really good thorough clean with a rag to try and get all the old stuff out. Now once you've given it a clean up, you can actually inspect the bearing itself. You're looking for any wear and tear on those little rollers there, any damage to the cage, anything that's really going to compromise the ability for that to spin around, because as you're going down the highway, that's obviously turning quite quickly. It's getting very hot. Any kind of water or sand or mud getting in there is going to really shorten the life of these, and you're going to have big issues. So definitely give it a good clean up with a rag there, both front and rear ones. Inspecting them both as you go along. That one's in great condition as well. Definitely no need to replace that there. Now these wheel bearings, like anything, they will wear out over time, but the more you maintain them, same as anything, the longer you're going to get out of them. Now I've done about 120,000 odd Ks on my ute, and these are still the original factory bearings. So I grease these every 20,000 Ks just to keep on top of them. I'm fairly certain that's what Toyota says to do. But yeah, keeping that fresh grease in there is really going to extend the life of these. Now, they're not an overly expensive part to replace, but if you can get more life out of them, then why not? So once you've cleaned up the bearings, you've given them a good inspection, I'm going to go ahead and clean out the bearing race, so the part that the bearing sits in the hub. Just give that same thing, a bit of a wipe over with a rag, get all that old grease out. If you do have mud and dirt and stuff like that in there, you are going to have to spend a little bit more time cleaning all that crap out so that you don't have any issues with that. Now this is the part you definitely want to make sure you have a lot of rags for, because you are absolutely going to chew through them for cleaning your hands and for cleaning the hub up here as well. So we're just going to go ahead and get all this crap out, and then we'll look at re-greasing these bearings. So we're going to use this special bearing packer. There's absolutely no problem in re-greasing these by hand. A lot of people back in the day used to do it that way. I've done it that way plenty of times. If you do it properly, you're never going to have a problem, but it is a very messy job. It's very hard to do with gloves on. It's a lot easier to do it on your skin. You're basically putting a big blob of grease on your hand and working that around. So avoid that whole mess. Chuck your bearing in there, use the plunger assembly, and you can fill it a lot easier without getting grease kind of everywhere. So as for the type of grease you want to use, well, the one that I use anyway, HTB stands for high temperature bearing grease. So very important that you're using the high temperature stuff. You can get regular heavy duty extreme pressure grease, but it doesn't have the same compounds in it that the high temperature does. Obviously when you're driving down the highway, we're getting a lot of heat built up in the bearing assembly, so it gets a little bit spicy in there, and we want to make sure the grease can handle those high temperatures. So extremely important to use that correct grease, otherwise your wheel bearings will fail very fast. So we'll open up our grease. Yummy. We'll load up our packer. And basically, that's what you're looking for. All the grease is pushed out up over the top of those rollers there. So that means that the grease has gone all the way through the bearing, and it's fully primed, ready to go. So once we're at this point, I'll generally just wipe that grease over the rest of the rollers. Any excess, I just kind of scrape off and put it back in the bucket. And there you go, we are ready to go back in. Nice and clean, nice and fresh. So we've loaded our plunger up with grease there. We'll just put a little bit more in. Make that in. And simply push it right down. And we're ready to go. Usually put a tiny little bit of grease on the inside of the race there. Then you can just drop your bearing straight back in. Put your washer in there, and you're good to go. You can flip it back over now and put the rear bearing in. Same thing, I'm just going to put a bit of grease in the race there. Go ahead and grab your bearing and chuck that in there. Now remember the rear one, we did that seal we need to replace. So just clean some of this grease off, and then we'll look at replacing that seal. So we're at a point now where we're putting the seal back in. Now, I always make a habit of getting the old seal and your new seal, your new part, and making sure it's the same thing. So just having a look at both of those. That's the right one. Now, you guys see the part number there from Toyota, genuine seal. We'll open that up. Now, once again, I try to clean the grease out of where the seal sits. You don't really want anything compromising the sealing surface. You want to make sure that the seal can go in nice and smoothly. So just give it a bit of a wipe down there, just being careful not to take too much grease off the actual wheel bearing itself. So once we've got that seal there ready, obviously pay attention to which way it goes out and comes in. I know that it's the gold side facing up. So to punch the seal back in, you're not going to be able to push it in. You need to kind of tap it in with something. You can get a kit, call this a seal driver kit. It's got a bunch of different shapes and like a little punch to connect to them. So out of your kit there, you just simply match up the right size to the diameter of the seal, and we can use that to evenly tap in the new seal there. Just put that on there. Screw that down. And now get the seal somewhat even, line that up, and you can start tapping it in. Just making sure that it's gone down nice and even. You've got no high spots, no low spots. Should sit fairly nicely in there. Once that seal's back in, it's ready to go back on the car. Now before I go back on with the hub assembly there, I like to give the spindle a bit of a wipe down and inspect it, as I mentioned before, so get some of that old grease off. Look, the grease was actually in quite good condition. I'm very happy with it. I can see there definitely hasn't been any water getting in there, any mud or anything like that. So the seals have been doing their job. But still, you want to give it a wipe down just so you can inspect that surface, that spindle surface thoroughly. And as you can see there, that's not too bad. It's not pitted or anything. Some light wear marks, but I would definitely say that's nothing to be concerned about. So once we've cleaned that up, we'll need to put some more grease on it. Now at this point you don't have to use the high temperature bearing grease because this isn't actually in a wheel bearing. You can just use the extreme pressure grease, multi-purpose grease, just to get a coating on there so everything can spin and move around freely. Once again, another messy part of the job. So once we've greased that up, our hub can go back on. Now just also being careful, making sure your wheel bearing doesn't fall out the front there. Just gently slide that on. Make sure it's seated. And we can line up our washer that's holding our front wheel bearing in. Slide it all the way home. Give it a bit of a spin, make sure it's turning around nicely, you haven't got any funny noises, anything like that. And that's turning around nice and smooth. Now that we're at that point, we can start putting our other parts back on. Now, I've laid these parts out in a way that the order basically that I pulled them off. So our nuts are going to go back on, then this section, then finally the hub. So pretty straightforward. Go ahead and start chucking those back on. So preloading your bearing. This is the part here that one of those things you kind of have to get the feel for it. What we're going to do is just put our first nut on, and this is what's going to give us our preload on the bearing. So again, you don't need to go swinging off this. Just kind of tighten it up somewhat by hand. I always give it a bit of a turn just to get the grease flowing. Okay, so usually when I'm at this point and I'm setting that preload on that bearing with this nut here, I'll kind of have the hub nut in one hand, spinning that around. You want to back it off a few times, retighten it. Same thing, you'll find it will get tighter and tighter, only by a small amount, but you will be able to get more tightness out of that bearing. Now what that is doing is just making sure that grease is flowing all the way through those rollers there. So generally just give that a few turns, back it off, tighten it back up again, spin it the other way, and then just give it final nip up, spin it around, make sure it's turning nice and evenly, and that's pretty well it. Now once again, like the torque setting and stuff for this, I don't really look at any of that. I've just, over the years, after I've done this many times, I just get a feel for it. I'm not putting much force in that there, and you can see it's spinning quite freely, quite easily. So you definitely don't want to have a rattle gun on that, tightening it up with a bar. I always just do it by hand using that socket, and that seems to get the job done. So that's the way I do it. Everyone has a different way, but that's how I've done it, and it's always worked for me. So once we've set that, we can go ahead and put that locking nut back in. It does have a little locator there, so we'll make sure that's in the right spot. Then we can put our lock nut on itself. And same thing again, you're not going super tight with that. Once again, you don't want to upset that preload on the bearing at all. So making sure that's somewhat tight. Once again, don't use a rattle gun, don't use a bar. It's just the way I do it. And of course, don't forget to fold down that tab. Just to make sure what that does is it actually stops that nut from coming loose. So make sure that's folded down. Only have to do one side. You'll probably find that the other ones won't actually align. So just fold down the one tab onto the side of that nut there, and that'll make sure none of that comes unscrewed. Now, once you're at that point, you can go ahead and chuck your next section back on, this little housing here. Now, this housing, there is actually a seal that sits in behind there. I always grab one from Toyota. It's just kind of like a carbon type gasket, kind of corky material. It does wear out with sand and mud and all the rest of it, but looking at the state of my seal, it's actually in quite good condition. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave that, keep it how it is. It is all pretty clean in there. Usually water is the thing that will flog these out the quickest. I haven't done too much water crossings or anything like that since I've last replaced these bearings. So I'm happy with that seal. I don't believe I need to replace it at this point in time. So I'll go ahead and chuck that little housing back on. You may have to spin the drive shaft a bit to get those teeth to line up, or flip it over. There we go. Now, at this point, don't forget to put your little snap ring back on. Very, very important. And what you'll find sometimes is the drive shaft will actually push in a little bit. So, a couple of different ways to pull that out. You can try some pliers and try and lever it out like that. Maybe a small screwdriver. That might get it. Worst case scenario, you've been trying your life out and you can't get it. I think it's an M8 bolt, just threads straight into that drive shaft there. Give it a couple of turns and you can just pull it straight out. And then you'll have enough room to get that snap ring on. So I usually keep it on there until I've got the snap ring in. Have your pliers ready. One tip I will give you as well with your snap ring, it's a little bit hard to see, but I actually got a grinder a long time ago and cut a little notch in the tips of the snap ring.
and that way the Circlip pliers can actually fit in there nice and snug. When they just have the flat surfaces, I find the pliers slip off all the time. So I just put those little notches in there with the angle grinder, and that sits in nicely. It's a one-hand operation. I can just slide it over just like that, very easy. So I used to struggle with that a lot until I put those notches in. Use that bolt as well to make sure the drive shaft's pulled all the way out. Once that's done, we can grab our fun little cone washers that we had a great time with before. Slide them back on and start putting our other nuts and washers on. I use my rattle gun to tighten this, but I'm going to put it down to the lowest setting. Let's go nice and easy. You really don't want to cross thread these. Cool. Next we can put our hub back on. Now, once again, make sure you're lining that up properly. There are a couple of little teeth on that that do sit in areas on this housing here. So sometimes it takes a couple of goes to make sure she's all good. Make sure your hub still turns, which it is, and unlocks as well. Put our caliper back on, put our wheel back on, and the job's done.